I'm Nicky Campbell. Welcome to The Big Questions. Today we're live from Samworth Enterprise Academy in Leicester. Welcome, everybody, to The Big Questions. Yes. Now, this week, the United Nations Committee on the Rights of the Child issued a damning report on the Vatican's handling of child abuse within the Catholic Church. It's called for the Vatican to remove all suspected clergy from their posts and to refer them to the police. Is it time for the Vatican to confess? Colmore Gorman, author of Beyond Belief and also a victim of Father Sean Fortune. Are they still withholding information?
Oh, undoubtedly. I mean, it's clear that the Vatican were asked to supply to the committee last year detailed information about their handling or the handling of child abuse cases. They failed to do that. The Vatican has had an interesting response to the report in which it's suggested that the report didn't consider all of the facts. Well, the Vatican was 14 years late submitting its report to the Vatican so that this review could happen. Yeah, absolutely, the Vatican is still withholding information. The simple reality is...
What information? I mean, are priests currently abusing or historical cases?
Both. I mean, we know that the Vatican jealously guards information at its own level. It said, for instance, to the committee, and its defence for not supplying information to the committee was that it only shares information on these kinds of cases in national jurisdictions where there are legal processes in train. So it only... But yet, at the same time, it refused to share information and failed to share information to two state inquiries that were being carried out by a judge in Ireland. So it's being disingenuous even in how it engages with the committee and then how it responds to the committee's report. The bigger issue, of course, is as the committee found, the Vatican has failed to put in place under canon law, the normative law of the global Catholic Church, the kinds of measures that would properly protect children and that would ensure that the Vatican and the Catholic Church is compliant with its obligations under the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child. And that's the point here. This was a UN committee inquiring into the implementation of a convention on the rights of children that the Holy See voluntarily signed and ratified and adopted and should be bound by.
The Vatican is a signatory of the UN, a member of the UN.
Well, it has special state status, effectively.
Okay,
it's a kind of a strange construct where it has a quasi-state status at the United Nations. But it's signed the convention. The Holy See signed the convention. The Vatican is inclined generally to try to claim different legal personalities. It's got so many different personalities. It jumps from one to the other, very often as a way of avoiding responsibility. And in that regard, under the convention, the Vatican has the Holy See has said, well, we signed the treaty not as the supreme authority across the global Catholic Church, but as the government of the Vatican City-State, which is this tiny state. The committee completely rejected that notion and said, no, that's absolutely true that is one of your entities, but you are also the ultimate authority right across the global church, and you can and do direct the functioning of practice in parishes and dioceses all across the world, and therefore the obligations of the treaty must apply to the church at the global level. So, now, in that regard, it said something that's just obvious and sensible to most people.
Ultimately, in short, you believe that the Vatican, the Catholic Church, is still hiding and withholding information that should be released?
Well, I think it's undoubtedly doing that. I mean, we need to get yeah, absolutely. We need to get the information. The fact that it refused to hand over information to the committee says it's failing to hand over information in an appropriate way. But more importantly, I mean, this report did not find anything that we didn't already know. It mirrors absolutely the findings in state investigations and judicial inquiries and grand juries across the world. And that is that the Catholic Church has, in the interests of protecting the institution, its authority, its money and its position, failed to protect children and has covered up and facilitated child sexual abuse on a grand scale.
On a grand scale. A litany, Peter Williams from the Catholic Herald, good morning, Peter, a litany of disgusting, heinous and unforgivable crimes. Yeah. Has it been sorted?
I hope we all recognise that those are disgusting crimes, by the way, and I hope that there's a concern for everyone here for the protection of children, and that's exactly why this UN report was an utter travesty of ignorance and ideology over sheer facts and evidence. When we actually look at the nature of the Vatican, which is something which was never taken into account by the actual committee itself, which basically ignored the evidence that the Vatican did give here, the Holy See, rather, gave to the committee. It ignored the fact that the Holy See and the Catholic Church is not a multinational corporation, which everything is micromanaged from a central place. It's a hugely decentralised coalition or communion of different national churches. Where abuse has happened, the disgusting abuse that has happened, what Pope Benedict called the filth filth that did happen. That happened in a national, local level. It never happened on a Vatican level. There's no evidence it ever did. And to bring up things like, oh, there are files in the Vatican that somehow have information we don't already know, is utter nonsense.
It's
what we do
nonsense.
know, it is utter, complete, unmitigated nonsense. And the reason why we know that is because we know that the way that the actual church works is that when the CDF, the Congregation of the Doctrine of the Faith, which has responsibility for this, it is supposed to oversee and make sure that procedures are carried out. Not that in each individual case something happens, but rather that the canonical procedures are there in each individual diocese. That means that the reports are fed back to the Vatican itself. So in other words, we've got copies of files.
Nonsense.
They don't have files themselves, they have copies of
utter nonsense.
No, it's not utter nonsense.
And
you just don't know what you're talking about.
I do, actually, because I've been working on this issue for 20 years.
Well,
but
you should have worked harder
there. There's two elements of this. I've worked incredibly hard on it, but thank you for the insult. There are two elements to this. First of all, we discovered, for instance, in an inquiry that took 11 years in Ireland, that at the Vatican level there were very detailed reports of internal church inquiries and investigations into individual acts of abuse being perpetrated by members of the religious that were held at the level of the Vatican.
Which are copies.
Copies. So they held files. So the committee asked them. The committee asked. So you now acknowledge that the Vatican holds very detailed files on child abuse cases. So it holds very detailed files.
Right.
And secondly, sorry, Nicky, just one very quick point. Since 2001, and actually beforehand, the Vatican has asserted its absolute authority for deciding how cases are to be handled. Also, when actions are taken at the national or local level, very often those who, for instance, are that canonical action or disciplinary action is taken against, appeal that to the Vatican, and the Vatican is the final arbitrator there. And the notion that somehow the Vatican doesn't instruct what happens at the local or indeed parish level is a nonsense. Talk to any priest who's dared to talk, or bishop who's dared to talk about issues like priests marrying. Or LGBT rights, or any of those issues, and you will find that at the level of the Vatican they swoop in with extraordinary force.
And there are three levels.
In a way that
let me ask you, Peter. Let me ask you, Peter. It's the basic contention that there's a big cover-up here. Some people believe, and there's no transparency.
But there's no evidence.
Cardinal Ratzinger, the late Pope Benedict, he, as head of the Congregation for the Doctrine of Faith, he collected all this information, didn't he? Has all that information been released?
The CDF's information are copies of files at diocesan level. If the police want a file, they can go to the local diocese. There's nothing new in the Vatican.
If the UN
there are
wants
three levels. I have to correct this. I'm sorry, I really have to correct this. There are three levels on which the Vatican has authority over local dioceses. There's canonical procedures, there's doctrine, and there's liturgy. Those things are not things that are simply imposed. Those things are rules that are imposed.
Surely Pope Benedict read them.
He did read them. He was at the CDF when he was Cardinal Ratzinger. He did much more than anyone else.
And he passed on the information to the police?
Well, it's not his job to do that at the Vatican level. It's the local diocese.
No, they didn't.
And they didn't.
Why wouldn't they?
Not only Richard Scorer, author of Betrayed, the English Catholic Church and the Sex Abuse Crisis. There seems to be this contradiction between we are centralised, we're decentralised, we abide by civil law, we abide by canon law. What's going on here?
Well, look, there's overwhelming evidence of a pervasive cover-up in every country in the Catholic Church on this issue. And there's a very simple way that the Pope and the Vatican could deal with this. They could give a very clear direction that all allegations of child abuse, historic and present, have to be reported to the police and civil authorities, and they will not do that. They will not make that very clear statement.
They did.
As a lawyer, do they absolutely have a legal obligation, you believe, to do that?
Well, this is the problem, actually. What the Catholic Church have said is you must obey the law of the land, but we don't have a mandatory reporting law in this country. So if a Catholic bishop knows about abuse committed by a priest, he has no obligation to take that to the police. That obligation will come if the Vatican gives a very clear direction that that has to happen.
Caroline.
OK, well, first of all, all of us in the Catholic Church accept that there was awful abuse and there was cover-up. And as a mother of 4 children, I can't begin to contemplate how awful people like Colm must feel.
Can I just ask you one question? Sorry, Caroline, just to put it into context. This has been going on for decades. They knew about it in the 60s and 70s and 80s. Why wasn't something, or a lot, done about it then?
There are a couple of reasons, but just to come back
Can you just address
OK, I wanted to come back to a point that Colm said.
We'll come back to that, but I think this is important.
I think it wasn't fully understood what was happening. I think there are a few things that went on, none of which were excusable.
How do you mean what's not fully understood?
As in, people, when you find out that one of your colleagues has been abusing children, priests who are known and loved, the first reaction is denial. This couldn't have happened. This could not have happened. A second reaction, and again, it was the wrong reaction, I think when certain cases came to light, various dioceses engaged with their lawyers, who obviously realised that a lot of money needed, rightly, to be paid out in compensation. And they engaged in legal terms, which meant not talking to the victims, stonewalling them, not actually putting their hand up and saying, we are sorry.
And not fully understanding the nature of paedophilia.
I think so, in as much as...
But surely knowing that molesting a little boy was wrong...
Yes, they would know that, of course they would know that molesting a little boy was wrong. But the Catholic Church, like any Christian church, we're a church of forgiveness. And there was a lot of naivety when somebody said, I am sorry. They would be... Sorry, can I continue?
With enormous respect, and I genuinely mean that, because I understand the perspective that you're coming from. The first law was introduced in the Catholic Church to deal with priests who offended against clerics in the 4th century. The first reference to paedophilia in the Catholic Church is from about the 2nd century. Catholic Church history is littered with law with which the Catholic Church tried to address the issue of child sexual abuse, sometimes from the perspective of eliminating it, sometimes from the perspective of trying to protect the institution. In the 1940s, the Vatican sanctioned the establishment of a specific religious congregation whose only function was to provide psychological support to priests with psychosexual problems. By 1963, the head of that congregation, a guy called Gerald Fitzgerald, had told the Vatican, had told the Pope, that priests who had offended against children, even following treatment, should not be returned to parishes because they would continue to abuse. He actually said that granting them new parishes is like granting them green pastures within which they would continue their wanton
So what went wrong?
So
Richard, what went wrong? I'll be back with you, Caroline.
It's actually a myth that, the Catholic Church didn't understand the nature of paedophilia 30 years ago. I mean, I've dealt with cases where, the Catholic Church got very clear medical evidence from psychiatrists saying that a particular priest was at risk of repeat offending, and yet they continued to allow that priest to work with children.
Or sent them away for training, believing that would...
But the other point, of course, is that Caroline says they didn't understand the nature of paedophilia. They took out insurance against the risk of claims, compensation claims, 30 years ago. Why take out insurance against something if you don't think it's a risk?
I think actually...
Caroline in a second. David Jennings just wants to come in with a non-Catholic perspective.
Well, I was going to say that for a start off. I'm an Anglican and not a Catholic, so I'm not party to the inner workings of the Catholic Church, although the Anglican Church is by no means immune from some of the problems and the issues that we've been discussing. But
or the BBC.
Yeah. Well, I wouldn't want to dare mention the BBC. What I want to just look at is how actually institutions turn in on themselves and protect themselves. And this isn't just true of the Catholic Church, it's true of the NHS. We've seen the Mid-Staffordshire crisis. It's true of the Army, where they don't deal with rape claims. All institutions have an ability to turn in on themselves, take on a life beyond any individual within it, to protect themselves. And I think that's the kind of thing that needs to be looked at very critically and actually exposed, because it is very damaging to individuals, such as Callum has described and others know only too well. But it also takes away any credibility that the institution has if it can't actually openly face and admit its own shortcomings and wrongdoing.
Another point in the audience, Caroline. Sorry.
Okay, well, and just as, the Diocese of Chichester in the Anglican Church, as recently as 2 years ago, has admitted that it had huge safeguarding problems. No one is suggesting that Canterbury hoarded all the information. And to come back to a point that Colm made, in Ireland there have been 3 state reports into the problem of child abuse. And those
the Ryan report, the Catholic Church didn't fully participate.
And 4 reports. And they investigated about 86 cases. Now, in every single one of those 86 cases, it was shown that no information was sent to the Vatican about this until 2005.
No,
this is what
is it true or isn't it true?
It's not true. The Ferns Inquiry, which is the one that I'm most familiar with because it dealt with my own case, for the first time ever in 2005, talked about the Vatican's central responsibility in this. It talked about how the Vatican had for instance, distributed information to bishops about how cases were to be handled, and had, as part of that policy, required that people be sworn to absolute secrecy and the issues not be discussed any further. It talked about the failure of the Vatican to make its diocese aware of this phenomenon at a time when it knew not only of the phenomenon, but the risks and the dangers associated. So it talked about very severe acts of negligence on the part of the Vatican. That was 2005. And to be clear, the Ferns inquiry, I think, dealt with about 28 priests in total. It dealt with hundreds of victims. The Rhine report dealt with thousands of victims. It wasn't 84 cases. We're talking about 4 major state investigations. The Rhine report, for instance, the Commission to Inquire into Child Abuse, ran for 11 years. It was a very substantive inquiry.
What you're saying
the Ferns inquiry was headed by a Supreme Court judge.
If I may, let's speak to Yvonne, who, what experience did you have in one of those industrial schools?
OK, my name is Yvonne Brennan, and I'm an ex-pupil of an industrial system of 18 years. And I and thousands of other people have gone through the system. So we have the real experience, not the ideas of what the book says. We actually have the real experience.
And I think physical abuse and sadism.
We have the real experience, and I don't need to go into that. The fact we all know what that is. However, what I'd like to talk about is the legacy of the damage, that the ripple effect of what the institution has done to thousands and millions of people. So, for example, the church is supposed to represent or give comfort, love. It's supposed to respect human life. What it has done to thousands of people and to thousands of innocent children, it gave them the opposite to that. It gave them a life about destruction. It gave them a life to loathe their bodies. It indoctrinated them about complete hate. It actually bred hate. So I would like to find out, what do we do to, what does the Pope do with regards to all of the innocent minds that were affected from very, very young? And this innocent mind has grown. This innocent mind has grown with hate, with destruction. This innocent mind has then married. It has spread out. So the Catholic Church actually has spread a disease. So how do we reach all of these people who have been diseased by the system?
How deep? In a minute, Peter.
It's very deep, and it takes years.
Do you think it's still there?
Of course it's there, because how can you possibly get rid of something which was ingrained in it's steeped in it, and in order for it to go, you have to go back and you have to abolish it. You have to say, hang on a minute, where did it go wrong? You have to go back to the basics, and you have to actually really look at what does Catholicism mean. It means, it was all this idea of being sacred. How do you become sacred? Through persecution?
No.
Through abstinence.
Peter.
I think this confuses the fact that there have been, this is really important to listen to experiences like this, because there have been terrible abuses by Catholics. But to blame the entire Catholic Church for that, I think is a real mistake, because that's an institution of over 1 billion people. The vast majority of whom have never hurt anyone and do spread that goodness and love and peace. But you know what? This is exactly why the UN committee had a real responsibility to bring out a report that would have had constructive things to say about how the church...
Isn't it exactly why all those files should be released?
But it hasn't done that. What it did instead is it brought out this ridiculous, prejudiced, ideological report. It might help. Most ironically, actually, tried to say to the Church that it should change its teaching on abortion, the worst abuse of the rights of the child, from people like Uganda, who have had horrible abuses of human rights.
That's not what it comes to children.
This is something which has totally misunderstood the nature of the Church in terms of its responsibilities on a local level. It totally made unacceptable claims about the Church's record on human dignity. It had nothing interesting to say or worthwhile to say about how to improve the rights of the child. That's what we should all be concerned about, and this United Nations report failed to do.
Let's get the audience. Let's get the audience to see what some people say.
It would appear to me, and I think to most right-thinking people, that there's been a systematic cover-up within the Catholic Church to cover up these vile abuses of children. And in what other walk of life would it be right to have someone do something that morally wrong in one place and say, we'll cover that up and we'll move you to somewhere new?
And then it
happens again and they cover it up. And it's an absolute disgrace. And those that perpetrated it should be sent to prison.
One of the limitations of the report is that it didn't mention that, particularly in the UK and the US, we have had 15 years of gold standard best practice. And so it's created a sort of climate of fear. What Evan said was incredibly powerful. And actually, what happened to you, no Christian could condone.
Absolutely.
Think of Mark 9. Anyone who causes one of my little ones to lose faith, they'd better have a millstone round their neck. But actually, what we saw, I think, in Ireland, particularly, is that the state colluded with some of these institutions. They were not monitored by anyone. They
Is
didn't
there a
come
problem?
under.
We're coming to the end on this. Let me just ask you quickly, and Yvonne, come back to you in a second. If in the confessional a priest says to another priest, I have been doing this, is there an obligation to make that information public or give it to the police?
If somebody, the confessional, what is said in the confessional has to be sacred.
Why?
Has to be.
If somebody says...
But if somebody, Nikki, if somebody is genuinely penitent, okay, we all go to confession, and we go to confession because we want to be forgiven and we want to amend our lives.
But these are unforgivable.
And the police will tell them to tell.
Nothing is unforgivable.
If you are genuinely repentant, Father, I abused a child. If you are genuinely repentant, you will go to the police.
Yvonne, last word, Yvonne.
As a growing child who is becoming adolescent, and the child says to the priest, I touched myself. The priest says, what does he say to that? So, because this is natural, this is I think the Catholic Church has completely denied the enjoyment of one's body.
No.
And that has been the problem. That has been the problem.
I've got
There's also the issue of the selection of priests. How does the church, whether it's the Catholic Church, the Anglican Church, or any other church, how do you actually select priests, and how do you then determine whether they're actually suitable?
Well, I think you would argue that process and that procedure has very much been sorted out. Caroline, we have to leave it there. Thank you all very much indeed for your contributions on that debate.